We'll let our panelists get settled in here. Welcome to LNS Elevate. We usually do this in audio, right, in a booth, but it's great to be live with you here to do an episode of LNS Elevate, to talk about an important topic here. We kicked this podcast off, and my name is Devon Wilson. I'm the Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. We kicked this podcast off in 2020 as a way to elevate the important work that's been happening in the college campus and beyond, as a way to tell the story and to be the tellers of our own story. And so this is another opportunity for us to do that, and we're glad that we're here. Even more importantly, it's important for us to be having this conversation when you think about the times in which we live, in the way in which we need to think about the work that we do, and the importance of that work as it means to be a public university here. And so we look forward to engaging in an important conversation and also having a little bit of fun while we're here together, and looking forward to sharing this time with you today. One of the things that I think is really important for us to be able to do is to create a community where it's important that we can engage and advance really important issues. And so our topic, as we focus on activating the Wisconsin idea, is really important. And what does that mean? And how do we reclaim that story? Is part of what we want to talk about today. And we are fortunate to have some incredible folks here today to have this conversation with us. I'll start to my left with Dr. Cora Merritt, who is class of '68, former acting director of the National Science Foundation, professor emeritus of psychology, and a member of the LNS board. Please welcome Dr. Merritt. To Dr. Merritt's left is Brenda Gonzalez, Director of the Community Relations, University of Wisconsin-Madison, really focused in leading our South Madison partnership. Please welcome Brenda. And Dr. Christy Clark Pujara, Department Chair and Professor of African American Studies. I can talk a lot about Dr. Pujara, but she will definitely share a story, but please welcome her to the show. And Dr. Luke Zoot, who is Associate Professor of Geoscience and a member of the LNS Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Dr. Zoot. We are also, and he didn't know this, having some contributors to this conversation. And so we'll have our own Dean Eric Wilcox, who's sitting up front, who will be a contributor. He is the Mary Jacoby Professor of Astronomy in the Department, Professor in the Department of Astronomy. And then we also have a class of 85 alum from African American Studies and Economics, founder and CEO of the Center for Black Excellence in Culture, and founder and president of the Nehemiah Center for Urban Leadership Development, and pastor of Fountain of Life Church and host of Black Like Me, Dr. Alex G., who's down in front. So they will be contributing to this conversation. And then we also have the ability for you to help. And so you also have received some index cards out there in the audience. So please think about questions, and we will be asking you to share those questions, and we hope to engage you in the podcast. As part of those questions, we'll collect those questions at a later part of this conversation. We'd love to hear from you. We may not get to every question, but we will take those questions and use that to inform our work moving forward. Now, I told you this was an audio podcast, right? I'm used to being in the studio, dressed the way I want to. So once we went to kind of doing the video, I had to bring my own prop. So at some point, you might see me bring this fan up to cool myself off a little bit, because I think I do have a face for TV, but I do not have a body for TV in this. So I might be sweating. So you will see some props being played out here. But we'll lay the foundation for this conversation today. A lot of people, we use a lot of words, right? We talk about the Wisconsin idea, and it's two words, and a lot of times we don't know what it means, right? I looked at the website. We have 1,000 examples of the way in which we're engaging the Wisconsin idea. And I was trying to think how many of us in the community and the community at large know about those things. And so I do think it's important to level set. What does that mean? We just use these terms. And so I always like to start with Dr. Merritt, because every time we talk about this, I feel like Dr. Merritt kind of sets us all straight on it, and I feel like then I have to sit up straight. And so I want to start with you, Dr. Merritt, to kind of really lay the foundation on the Wisconsin idea and the way you see it should be playing out, particularly as it relates to being a public university.
Thank you, I guess. But the Wisconsin idea generally is traced to President Charles Van Hise, who in 1904 said how he would never be content until the beneficial effects from the university were found throughout the state. But he wasn't the first to make that kind of an argument. In fact, earlier, John Bascom, who was president much earlier, Bascom had emphasized especially the role of the university in the educational process, suggesting that that classrooms should be places in which people would come to understand their responsibilities beyond themselves. Now, the idea of this engagement with the larger populace, that idea gained prominence, especially in the 1920s and 1930s. It was during that period when you saw a lot of interaction between the university, especially researchers at the university, and the state government. The state drew on the university for addressing problems that were fundamental issues across the population. Thus, when I think of the Wisconsin idea, I think of it in terms of the strong emphasis on the outreach and engagement of all. It is to be then something that says we use the resources from research, resources from classrooms, whatever resources to enhance the well-being of the population. That then is really what was fundamental to those early approaches to the Wisconsin idea, although it was really not formulated until a volume in 1924 that said this is what the Wisconsin idea is all about. And as you mentioned a while ago, one sees now a lot of emphasis on the Wisconsin idea. I would suggest, though, that especially the website that the university uses takes a very somewhat narrow approach to the Wisconsin idea, because what it does is to illuminate particular projects people have carried out, university researchers primarily have carried out in the interest of the population. But you don't see there as much of this emphasis on what should happen in the classroom or the sorts of matters that have been targeted for this discussion: the community, the building of community, and the drawing on communities for promoting the well-being of all. But that then is the way I see the Wisconsin idea, as this absolutely phenomenal and potentially path-breaking approach that says to us at the university, we have a responsibility beyond ourselves, beyond the communities that might represent our disciplines. We have something that says it's the well-being and the well-being of all that would be especially important. Those then are my comments.
So there you go. So you know why I started there, right? I mean, it sets a really important context. And so then what does that mean when it starts to play out in action? What does that mean in terms of how it happens in real world context? And so I'd like to get into this idea of, what does it mean to be more than just two words? What does it mean to be more than a phrasing versus something that is transformative in the way that Dr. Merrick talked about it? I'd like, Brenda, I think you're a good place to start to talk about how this gets activated.
Yes, thank you. It is an honor to be here and being able to sit alongside with some of the professors and researchers and all of you here. I'm excited to say that maybe we have in more concrete ways the idea of the Wisconsin idea. When I think about my role in community relations and the idea that we have the South Madison Partnership, a location that I hope some of you know about, and if you don't, if you are interested in learning a little bit more, you can visit us certainly on the website, but also on South Park Street. Every time that I think about it, I think about this is the hands-on, concrete Wisconsin idea that equates all of the conversation, all of the history that you have mentioned, Professor, to what we have been able to create. The only thing that I think has been different is the fact that now we are kind of bringing the community to the table to say we need to start having conversations so we can really co-create. And I know that that word has been used over and over, and sometimes it feels that it's not necessarily transparent or designed to really create that idea of we need to work together. But I believe that when you have a space like the South Madison Partnership, I think that the university says, absolutely, we want to make sure that we are taking that step forward to say we are investing. Certainly, it wasn't just a creation of one group of people. We have been going on for now 8 years that the South Madison Partnership has a new location on South Park Street, but certainly two specific, very concrete ideas of the Wisconsin idea are, one, the Odyssey Project that you probably know about, and we can talk more about it, but also the Neighborhood Law Clinic, really putting hands on serving the community. So those are the two examples that are within the South Madison Partnership that you can think about the Wisconsin idea, and they have been working in community for about 20 years. We can certainly talk more about SMP in a little bit.
So let's talk a little bit about Odyssey. I think that'll set a little context. So why don't you just give, for folks who might not be aware, but talk a little about the Odyssey project.
Absolutely. Odyssey has grown, and many of you maybe recently have heard about the Odyssey Beyond Bars, but certainly Odyssey every semester has a cohort of 30 students, and they provide college humanity classes, 3 credits, and then 6 credits free to returning adults that want to pursue education, higher education, and have found themselves with barriers in their journey. So they are part of the cohort every year, and now there are over 600, I believe. Certainly, we sit in their board of directors, about 600 alum that now are part of the Odyssey project. But every semester they have a class, again, humanities class and a few other things. They do support wraparound services to make sure that every student has open the schedule and full potential to be able to accomplish their goals. So they have Odyssey Junior, that is kind of services that support the kids of the students that are part of the Odyssey class, and they have food and other things that are happening during the class every one day a week. They provide also transportation, and that is the Odyssey class. And certainly not only have the class for the students, but also for alums. So returning adults are also different classes that are provided to those alums that come back. I'm sure you have other
Odyssey
things.
is one of my favorite things to talk about. I got involved with Odyssey several years ago. I got invited in to do some guest lectures, and it has been among the most inspirational and joyful work I have done. I look forward to going to Odyssey every year, and I'm now on the board for Odyssey because I think it's the best of us. This university has the power to transform lives, and if you want to see it directly in action, go to any Odyssey event, and you will see how people's lives are literally being transformed. People who went from being unhoused to now landlords for people that are in the Odyssey program. Like, to experience and see those stories and learn from them has been a tremendous honor.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, I guess, as you can see, Odyssey does generate a great deal of interest. And I'm always interested in its origins and what happened in New York when there was a group of citizens who said, we want to learn something we want to improve our lives. We want to learn what you people in the universities know. And the response was, yeah, they want to know how to balance checkbooks. We can teach them that. They said, no. That's not all of what you do. You engage in a lot of other things. You do the classics. We don't know anything about the classics, but why not? And that kind of an idea that you can improve lives, you can enhance opportunities by providing all sorts of chances that go beyond what might be thought of as the mundane kinds of things. With this, I'll finish with one little comment about the Wisconsin idea. In 2015, the then governor wanted to have the university mission statement this way. It would say that the university is responsible for meeting the workforce needs of the state. The reaction was phenomenal. He said, is that the only thing the state needs? Is that the way we want to articulate what we, as an educational institution, are really up to? That then is what Odyssey represents. That's what I'm suggesting the origins of the Wisconsin idea are ideas that were not always fully formulated, but at the basis, that notion that we have a responsibility to develop, to enhance human talent wherever it exists. Thank you.
Thank you. And one more thing to add is that the Odyssey has been going on for 20 years, actually 21 years now. But they used to try to find spaces in different locations in community. They had their offices at the university on campus, and then they had to run to different locations in the community. So I think that the conversations that others in my role, like Judge Mitchell, was very strong to say, we want to make sure that the university understands the work that is being done through Odyssey in the community and with the community. And that's why the South Madison Partnership was initially created, to make sure that we supported the groups that are already working in the community. So Odyssey was the first one of the core partners that are part of the South Madison Partnership. And they are now, the offices are hosted there and the classes are being held in the South Madison Partnership. Not only that, but they have grown. Again, I mentioned the Odyssey Beyond Bars, but also you have to really pay attention to Odyssey Seniors. That's a fun, amazing class for seniors, in Odyssey Veterans, and actually Odyssey Junior that I mentioned before. They have Odyssey Babies, and that is an amazing space to be able to see that very, very young Bucky or Badger, future Badger, on their way. Thank you.
Christy, well, you talked about getting involved, and a lot of times it's this town gown, right? In a way, in how faculty, as a faculty member, you initiated its engagement. You talked about it in terms of the Odyssey project, but what was that process for you as a faculty member coming in? How you got engaged in the community? How did that happen?
So I first heard about the Wisconsin idea when I was interviewing on campus more than 14 years ago at this point. And I thought it was really intriguing. And so my second year, I went on the Wisconsin Idea bus tour. And it takes faculty all around the state. We went to a dairy farm. We went to Aaron's, they make like lawnmowers and snowmobiles. We went to a couple of public schools in Milwaukee. We went to the prison in Oshkosh. We went to Door County and had a fish boil. And that tour really stayed with me, of how we were received and perceived by people throughout the entire state. And for me, the Wisconsin Idea is really personal, because I'm a first-generation college student, and I always wanted my work to matter and be accessible to the people that raised me, that poured into me. And I grew up knowing that there's education and then there's intelligence. The smartest people I knew didn't have any formal education, and I had a ton to learn from them. And the experiences that I've had, both inside and outside of the academy, have taught me that we have a lot to teach each other. And that artificial separation is a real problem. But when we get down and start talking to each other, it dissipates. I've been able to have conversations with folks in farming communities, at public libraries, at VFWs, at, different school events. And when you just start talking to people about what they want, how they want to improve their lives, and who they think that you are as a university professor, that has incredible utility. Our ability to be out and talk to people and be in public, and it has shaped my career in really profound ways. I love that the Wisconsin Idea has encouraged me to seek out opportunities to share my work outside of the university. I never had to feel hesitant about that because I knew I had this whole philosophy of the Wisconsin Idea, excuse me, backing me up. And when I think about over the last few years, what has been tremendously impactful to my work, it's work with Nehemiah and Reverend Dr. G and Justified Anger and the Black Leadership Institution. It's changed how I've approached what I do. Focusing on civics in classes that I teach, like Introduction to African American History, led me to my new research project, which is about Black people in Wisconsin. I teach Introduction to African American History, and I wanted to bring local history into the classroom. I wanted to name places and spaces that most of my students could identify with, knew where they were. And I went to the Historical Society, which is one of my favorite places on campus. If you haven't been there, go there. It's a beautiful building, just if you're looking for a place to work, but it's also like the 5th biggest depository in the country. Like, whatever you want is there. If you are any kind of nerdy, you'll be super excited to be in that space. But I went there and I started talking to the archivist and the librarians there, and they led me to all of these little notes that they had begun to create on the history of Black people in Wisconsin. And I was so incredibly excited. And I started looking for the book on Black Wisconsin because I was bringing all of these tidbits into my classrooms. Like, okay, so let's talk about Black people in Wisconsin before it was Wisconsin, during the French colonial period in the 1720s. And my students would kind of look at me like, there are Black people in what becomes Wisconsin in the 1720s? And I'm an early Americanist, so I do before the American Civil War. And there was all of this information, and then I started looking at the historical societies across the state and the system schools, and I realized that that's my next project, right? To tell the history and stories of people of African descent in this place that we now call Wisconsin, from the 1720s through the American Civil War. And they are stories that are incredibly inspiring. One of my favorites is Pleasant Ridge, Wisconsin, where formerly enslaved Black people went out and just created a space for themselves. And these people weren't just like surviving, they were thriving. They had a dance hall, they had a poetry club, right? In the middle of Wisconsin, right? And it's not too far from Platteville. If you've been out to Platteville, Pleasant Ridge wasn't too far from there. But there's all of these really incredible stories that tell us a lot about the formation of the state, how democracy was debated during the territorial period, who wasn't included, who was excluded. And I think it just really widens our lens as to who we think belongs. And I'm always careful to say in this place we call Wisconsin, because those stories also took me to the Native history I did not know, that I was not taught in my colonial education. I have a PhD in American history, and I was never required to take a single course on Indigenous people. And it's not until I came here and started working with folks like Aaron Birdbear, who's no longer here, and Omar Polar, who is here, and learning about Ho-Chunk people in this space that we are on today. We are on sacred space. I always remind my students that the Ho-Chunk people's creation story is where we are. Like, their literal creation story. What Israel is to Christians and Jews, Madison is to Ho-Chunk people. And are we honoring that? Do we think about that? Do we know that? Does that shape how we think about ourselves in this space? So for me, the Wisconsin idea, yes, is intellectual, but it's also deeply personal.
We warmed up, yeah, we warmed up. We are warmed up. Luke, I want to bring you in because this is a really important thing because it kind of, getting into this takes a level of commitment. When we've had a lot of conversations about, how do you approach this work? And I know you've been building relationships and you have a certain way you approach it. And I'd love you to talk about your work and it's also a personal nature, I know for you, but how you approach it and what the approach needs to be.
Yeah, I think, when I think of the Wisconsin idea and I go into communities, I guess to some of my approach, it's slow, right? I'm not trying to rush into anything. I'm not trying to get in there and enforce change that's not what the community wants or anything like that. I think, the key here is listening, right? You go into communities, you listen to what they want, you listen to what they need, you try to help where you can help, right? And you push it forward. And so that's on a lot of different levels. If we're out there doing a research project, you talk to the community, you say, what can we do that would help you? And maybe you can't address it with that project, but you internalize what they say. And you think, okay, over the years, as I keep working on this project, maybe I can get to the point where I can address a certain problem they're having in their community and provide some help that's right in line with what they're asking. And so, we've worked real hard here at developing relationships, in particular with the College of Menominee Nation, and trying to work with the community there, the students there, the faculty there. And, it's been a long process. We're helping with them to develop a geoscience program. And it takes years and years and years, and, they have to work with their community too. And so, I think when you do that, you just gotta be sensitive to the different ways in which these communities operate, and not trying to force the way that maybe a university like Wisconsin operates upon them, right? Just be sensitive to their cultural needs, things like that. And then when you develop those types of relationships, everything starts to become reciprocal, right? In my experience, you realize that you have at least as much to learn from them as we have to learn, as they have to learn from us. And so it's not just us coming in and giving them knowledge and saying this is the way it is and this is how it goes. It's, you spend a lot of time listening to them, developing the relationships and understanding the way that they approach it. And a lot of the times, you'll be struck with something that's oh, that's not what I expected to hear. And you got to take that back and think about it for a while. You got to think about those things that sort of sounded off at first, or not the way you expected to hear them, and say, why did I have that reaction to it? Why did I have that perception to it? And then adjust and go forward and keep working with these communities. In a lot of these instances, in a university like this, if the way things get funded is through grants and programs and things like those, and those have finite lengths, right? You might have a grant for a couple of years. You might say to work with some community for that specific time period. But that's not how real relationships work, right? You're not a friend with someone for 3 years, and you're like, okay, I moved away, and now I'm never going to talk to you again, right? And so the goal here is to develop real relationships, because if you're not, kind of what would be the point of it, right? We want to have real personal connections. And so if your grant ends, then you just keep working on the project with them, right? And you keep going, and maybe you get more funding to support them, maybe you don't. But the point of it is to have this reciprocal relationship and have help them and they help you, and even if it's not specifically tied to some project that's outlined here. And you have to keep that relationship building time after time after time, and it requires an investment. It requires people to get in there and do the work and push things forward, which isn't always the easiest thing to do, but it's the necessary thing to actually make progress in a lot of these areas, I feel like.
As I was listening, and thinking about, the work that you're doing, Luke, that everyone's doing here, but, Christy, you raised up, this presence of individuals of African descent here. So as you think about Wisconsin and its brand, it's seen as this predominantly white state where there are vibrant communities of color. I reside in Beloit. There's a history right there on the border that a lot of people don't know about. So there's these vibrant communities that stories often don't get told. here in Madison, I think through a lot of the work that was talked before, just about vibrant communities, what are some of the specific challenges to what is seen as the state in terms of what it's viewed at, and trying to do this work, given the complexity and all these vibrant stories that have not been told? Anyone can kind of jump in on that one.
If you don't mind, if I can start, not necessarily the whole state. My focus as the community relations, local government affairs director, I focus here in Madison and Dane County. But I think it is really important, all of these conversations that we are having, and how we are having to change the way that we are talking about that relationship or the community or the project in a way that really is beneficial for both. I think that the systems need to change, and I think I can very proudly say that the fact that the university, the chancellor, and both chancellors, certainly Chancellor Blank was a great supporter, and now the Chancellor Mnuchin supported of the South Madison Partnership. I think that having the location there and having that space has created a little bit of the change in how we are telling the story about the project or about what is happening in that particular area, and of course in other spaces as well. But I think that has created a little bit of the conversation with other leaders in the community that also right away feel that they can bring their feedback. Certainly there are many that are part of the Community Advisory Council that meets with the Chancellor, for example, that right away feel like that is a way to respond to whatever is happening in the community that can bring directly to the office, the main office. And all of that to say, then we can connect with the communications team, if you will, to be able to say, how can we bring the community to internal and on campus, but also externally? What is the relationship between the city and the community and the university campus, to be able to say we are not only telling the story from the research perspective or researcher or professor, but also from the community. We have a very specific project within South Madison Partnership that is the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Disease Research Center that focus on African American community memory testing. And I think that the fact that we are listening to community, they're listening to community directly, they're able to respond to a few things. So for example, it's not only about the testing that they're performing there, but also to hear, we need to exercise every day. That's what you were telling us. So can you please bring a class that can bring us to that point? So absolutely, we are exercising every couple of times a week. Beautiful music, beautiful people that are coming to the center, and that creates a very different story than just saying we are the researchers or this particular office is in community asking for feedback.
Yes, this is not a response to your question. It's really a question to you.
Oh, okay.
Because this is the kind of a thing, you have been spending a lot of time around the issue of how do you identify vibrancy in communities and get those communities engaged with, in this case, this university. What would be your responses?
See, this is what happens, You host a show, you do a rundown, you hope it's gonna go that way, but when you get the right folks on, then you become the person who has to answer this question. I think one of the things that, one of it is, we talked a little bit about this, the community will inform you. So part of it is having a real keen sense and listening to what is needed is important. And you have to think about this as a real iterative process. Nothing's gonna happen overnight. I've always approached it like, let's start the journey. And what ends up happening is as you start that, you begin to find really important things. And you can start in places where there are really important issues. So some of the places I've done a lot of my work is in economic development. I've been involved in a lot of those conversations. Who's sitting at the table? And how do we help facilitate a process for folks to have access to those conversations? And so I've always, a lot of times you have to see what your role is. Is it the convener? Sometimes you're the one who brings everybody in the room, right? You're not the catalyst. You're the one just make sure the food's right. And you bring in the room and you collect and you figure out what the next step is. And so I do think it's really helping communities in thinking about and hearing what folks need And then you start small. Any efforts I know I've been involved in, they start small and they begin to take momentum. And then people take it where it needs to go. You get amazed what can happen in a process like that. But I've always been that person who's been the convener. I'm the kind of person, I guess, in this space, I've tried to get the right people in the right room to have the right conversation. And, and if my role is to like create that space, I've always tried to do that. And sometimes that's a role for it, or it's to advocate. I can knock on the door, open the door up to get the process going. So there's a lot of different things, and I'm the learner. There's a lot of things I go in and realize, I don't know anything about this. It's okay, and I'm gonna learn a lot in this process. That's gonna shape the way I go at it. So there's a number of ways. You can't go with one tool. You just have to be open and be open to add tools in how you can support anyone in moving. And you also have to see yourself, at one point, as part of the community. So I am a citizen. These are my neighbors I'm talking to, right? We are trying to figure this out together, right? So I often come in there like, what is we, right? Because I'm living, whether it's in Wisconsin, Southeast, South Central Wisconsin, I am part of that citizenship.
Well, Associate Dean Wilson, I'm going to hold you to the convener role because
I am.
I have plans.
Yes, I know
many
that.
plans.
I know that. I'm ready.
I think some ways that the university has really done a good job in acting this out, and I think it's important to think about not only what the university gets wrong, but what it gets right, is the Public History Project. The Public History Project started with, what does the community want us to ask and know? For those who aren't familiar, the Public History Project was funded by the late Chancellor Blank, and it asked one central question. What was the experience of the university like for non-majority students from its inception to now? What was it like to be an Asian or Asian American student on this campus in the 1950s? What was it like to be an African American student on this campus in the 1890s? And it was a project that brought up a lot of painful histories, but also highlighted a history of change that was driven by students of color to make this institution a better place. And one of the proudest moments I've had as a faculty member at UW-Madison is the opening of that exhibit and seeing folks point out, that was my grandfather, that was me, right? And connecting to this place that was finally telling their story too. That was brave enough to say, we were wrong, we were immoral, but those people made us better. And I think we need more of that. We need more projects that start with, what does the community want us to know, want us to do? I'm part of an initiative called Our Shared Future that I got brought into by Aaron Birdbear and Omar Poehler, which is about creating a real relationship with the Ho-Chunk Nation. And what so attracted me to that initiative was, it's always, what do the Ho-Chunk people want us to know and do? Everything starts from there. And I think that this university has a great opportunity with the Center for Black Excellence to do the same kind of thing.
You just teed it up, because I was gonna go to one of our contributors, I know Dr. G, you've been kind of listening here, but since it's been teed up, I'd love to get some of your reactions to what you've heard so far, and even maybe talk a little bit about the work that you're doing.
Yes, sir. Folks, should I leave it to my I can just sit here and talk.
Just talk.
This is a real robust conversation that I'm enjoying. A couple things have come to mind. I class of 1985, as you said in your introduction, and I'm thinking about how much I describe the Wisconsin idea and read about it, but as a student from 1981 to 1985, I don't remember ever hearing about it. And so as I was listening, I wish, or my hope is that the University of Wisconsin-Madison becomes as known for its Wisconsin idea as it does Jump Around, and that people are more familiar with it than varsity, because in some ways it makes varsity make sense. And I probably learned varsity before being a student, because all you have to do is go to a game to do that. But I think about the things that we're known for outside of this campus, and the things that we really should be known for, because the Wisconsin idea is a very novel and thought-leading or provoking idea. I feel that one of the things that we've got to do in order to really make the Wisconsin idea the truly rich idea that it can be is to understand that when President Van Heist, or even prior to that, when President Bascom talked about their dreams for it, how were indigenous people, how were black people, how were Latinx people seen in the world? Because some of those dreams did not include us. And so at some point we have to understand that the Wisconsin idea it doesn't need to be tweaked, but it needs to be understood that not everyone was thought of when that happened. And when you're treated as an afterthought, you function like one. So I feel that the opportunity that we have is to continue to think through that, to weave people in, to make sure that people feel that it includes them as well. And the other thing that I heard, and I think this came from a prior discussion with Dr. Merritt, who was one of my professors back in the 80s when I was here on campus in the Afro-Am department, was that as I read the Wisconsin idea, I feel that it was really meant to be a two-way street. So it's not only giving back to the university, but how does the community give to the university? And as a graduate whose family has 13 degrees from Wisconsin, I'm not sure if we were ever charged at graduation that our aggregate work would be combined with with the work of other graduates, other alumni, and having an impact around the world. And I feel like that should have been part of the marching orders as we walked out of the stadium when we graduated. And so I feel that there's still so much that graduates have and know, not just about business and finance and fundraising, but the social sciences and history and culture that the campus can really benefit from. But I haven't seen that two-way street the way I'd like to see how do we influence the campus, because that's got to be the desired outcome that you want to invest so that somehow that comes back to you. So those are some of the things that I was thinking about. Part of my work with the Center for Black Excellence in Culture grows out of my own family's experience, my mom's experience on campus in the early 70s, and how, in our case, particularly the black students who had community connection, stayed and they seemed to flourish. When I was here in the early 80s, black students had a place to go off campus, and sometimes it was my mom's home with home cooking and a place to talk and connect. And those folks, people who I met because of the Wisconsin idea, because of UW-Madison, actually helped me to start the nonprofits that I now run. I get lots of respect and there's credibility and lots of mention of the things that I've done, but I sat around with a motley crew of black students, many of whom were student athletes, who chose to stay in this community post-graduation because I asked them to help me build inroads into the black community so that we could give back to society. And so I feel that the Center for Black Excellence in Culture, a place where black people really feel at home, because our Pan-African stories and are first all around the state. Folks from Africa, folks who identify as Afro-Latino, people who are Caribbean, and of course North American blacks, and even the intersection of blacks and Native Americans, which is huge in black culture. We don't talk about as much as our grandparents did. How do we tell those stories, and how do we become a home away from home for black students, faculty, staff, coaches, so that they can build a rapport and connection with the community, so that the Wisconsin idea includes us, but becomes this mutually beneficial, reciprocal kind of experience that I think can really enhance the university and the community, but also the broader society. So we're working on this project in partnership with the university. Many folks who are helping that to happen, Dr. Merritt and Brenda, Dr. Clark Pujara, and Dean Wilcox, and others, the chancellor, are part of this discussion with me, as well as students. But I feel that it's important to note that our work has really grown out of the relationship of black folks who I met because of the University of Wisconsin. These aren't people who I just met at a conference. They're people who were brought together initially decades ago because of this campus. And I'm not sure if the campus yet sees that potentially as a part of the Wisconsin idea.
There's a lot said there. I want to give you, anyone in the panelists, a chance to respond. Especially, I think your first point about there are a number of things that are developed in the context where not everybody was present. And so that's an important starter to think about that context. But anyone here want to react to what was said by Dr. G? Other than amen.
I mean, my reaction is thank you for all of that, right? I mean, there is no other way to think about how do I feel personally being in this country, being in this university, but without the words like you are sharing and many others. That has been the only way that, for me, that sense of belonging makes sense, is real. So very personally, thank you for that work. Certainly, thank you for being part of the Community Advisory Council and the community. And every time that we talk, it seems like we can push for that changing system, if you will, that we are hoping for many different communities. I do think that because of that change, or because of that conversation, we have been able to, as the system, as campus, been able to push for a different role, like the Director of Tribal Relations that Aaron Berber started, and now Carla Viju has that role. We were able to start thinking about, what else we need to make sure that we have a leader in that community that can help us really have a better communication with the tribes. That is one of the examples that your conversation makes me think about.
Yes, it's just, you had so many powerful comments that I don't even know where I would start, except to say thank you. I was especially struck by the comments about reciprocity, that it isn't just a matter of what the university does for the communities. No, it's the kind of interaction that has to be there. And that always reminds me of something, I hope we will also spend some time on what we're not doing all that well. Yes. I'm bothered by, on this campus, we do have faculty who are out engaged in activities. We have academic staff, our classified staff, though I'm just not convinced that they're being drawn in the way we need to have them drawn in. These are members of the communities too. There are ideas, and when we go out to try to suggest that the university wants to build communities, wants to enhance the well-being of all, do we convey that to the people who are in these roles at our own institution? So I think that I was listening and thinking too about what else might we do. We want to take pride in the things that you're leading, no question about it. But we also want to say, what else could be there if we want to build the kind of community that we say the Wisconsin idea is supposed to be central to, that because we know we're not as far as we should be and could be at this point in time.
So let's build on that, because I did want to pivot a little bit to that. So let's build on what are some things that we're not doing well, and what are some of those barriers? Let's talk a little bit. Let's dig into that, because I think an origin of those barriers come from the foundation. I think that Dr. G, there's a lot of things that were created in a framework in which there are a lot of voices, so that shapes the way you approach it. Are there ways in which you could say we got more work to do?
I think one area that we would like to improve on is the representation of our students, right? That they represent the state and then all the different broad communities that we have here. And I think an important step for that, is things that we're working on here, but are building communities on campus that make them feel like they belong when they get here. And it's important to put that groundwork in first, or at least at the same time, so that when students get here, they feel like they have a place that they can exist. They feel like they have a place where they can flourish. And once we do that, I think we'll start to see, really dramatic changes in the people at the university, the diversity at the university, and things like that going forward.
I like the idea of the kinds of outreach and the engagement with students, and I'm reminded of something that Professor Kathy Kramer has emphasized. She's known for her work in which she went around the state and talked to people about their views, and she found out that people thought the rural-urban divide in the state is pretty incredible. But that's not really the part that I'm most interested in. What she did recently was a course in which she had the students talk about what was going on. And most of the students, she said, began by saying, oh yeah, there are people who are just, they don't understand. They're too conservative. She said that was the first problem, because they didn't have a way for thinking about their own views and what was the basis for those views. Her comment, she came out with a conclusion that we've got to build communities of students, that not only these students, primarily white students at the campus, without a lot of experience with either students of color of any kind of background, they didn't have a lot there, but they didn't know anything about what had been reported by these students who were on the margins, who felt marginalized. And she said, what the course suggested to her was that we have to spend a lot more time thinking about the building of community within our own campus. So she brought my attention to the importance of the building of community among students. But you ask, what are we bothered by? I'm sometimes bothered by the level of the disconnects that exist in the campus because of we're an institution with a lot of divisions, with a lot of differences, and not enough communication about what could be the shared kinds of concerns that are there. So your question just generated for me a lot of issues that do relate to what are we seeking to do, and how do we seek to do this in ways that will build community, but to think of community quite broadly. It's the set of outreach, it's the outreach to the other populations within our geographical borders, but it's also within the populations we have on our campuses. What do we mean about the building of community?
I often struggle when people say build community in terms of what can it mean and what can we do tangibly. Because there are often so many barriers to community building tangibly on campus. And when you speak to the students, I spend a lot of time with students from the freshmen to the graduate students, because I teach these introductory classes and they're primarily freshmen and sophomore, but then I also teach seminars, and those are junior, seniors, and graduate students. And I get a disproportionate number of non-white students in my class. If you were to walk into one of my classes, it's not reflective of the 2% of black students on campus. It's usually a third or things like that. So I have, I think, more interaction with students of color just in general than a lot of faculty do. And the things that they really need to help them not just get here, because I think we're fairly good at getting them here, but keeping them here is the other thing, retention. And sometimes they just need a space to be young adults. They just need some food and space and time. And those sometimes are very hard things for departments like mine to give them. We know that that would work. We could just host some movie nights, some pizza nights, just to give them some space and some time. But that's not how reimbursements work on this campus, right? Like, it's really hard to do things like that. You know, something that we do when we recruit graduate students is we tell our graduate students, take them somewhere off campus so they can see that there's a life for themselves off campus, and there's not a lot of places for them to go. And then we can't get reimbursed for that, so we just pay for it out of pocket. Because, if you're not hosting it on campus, and if there isn't a faculty member there, well, then that doesn't count. But those are the kind of things, and we know because they tell us, that they need. That works. And so, one of the reasons that I was willing to go into a leadership role is because I wanted to see behind the doors, like, what can we do to make these kinds of small changes I can think have big impact? That not everything is going to fit into these rigid structures because, and this is the historian in me, and especially the early historian in me, universities were not built for black people. in this country. They weren't built for Asian people, they weren't built for indigenous people, they weren't built for Latinx people, they weren't built for Chicano people, they weren't. If we look at the history of universities in this country, they were built for the sons of wealthy planters, slave traders, and merchants. That's who they were built for. When we think about who this university was built for, well, it came into existence at the same time the state was. And when the state came into existence, they said that the only people that mattered were white male adults. And that's not my opinion, that's just a statement of fact. Go look at the suffrage articles. Who can contribute? You had to be white, male, and adult. Citizenship didn't matter. It was whiteness that mattered. And so are we trying to fit people into a system that wasn't created for them and then go, why don't they fit? I hope we're not who we were in 1848. So that means our systems have to change. It means that we have to think about who our fellowships support. Who does a $27,000 fellowship support? It supports a student that parent can, chip in for the rent and pay their car insurance and pay their cell phone bill. That there are some real structural changes that can help us build and sustain community. And that it's not always going to fit into what the university was set up for. And that we have a charge at this university. I can't remember what class it was, but I have a little plaque in my office, and it refers to the fearless sifting and winnowing. That part of what makes this university great is that it will fearlessly sift and sinnow for the truth, even when it doesn't always feel good. Because we should be constantly changing, right? We shouldn't be stuck in the past. And when we're thinking about community building, we have to think about what structures are in the way of some basic community building.
That is such an important point, because I don't think, when our systems get into place, and when you think about community relationships and agreements, even things about who owns the intellectual part of that. The university has policies around that get in the way probably of innovation, even our practices. So sometimes we're looking for, larger things, but sometimes it's a simple, can we do that transaction? That can be a barrier to actually innovation. And so if you have a faculty member or someone who doesn't even lift because they don't want to navigate it, the systems that underlie your ability to do it are things we have to pay attention to, because those are barriers to doing simple things like creating space, right? So that's a place where I often find myself engaging in those activities, pushing back, because there are policies that keep us from saying what we want. We think the vision is supposed to happen, and they are the things that can help to, again, get things going, but we have to think about those structures. I think that's an important thing. I want to make sure I make an announcement here. For folks who have index cards, please start to push those to our dean and ambassadors. We want to be able to catch some of your questions, and so we have some dean and ambassadors who will catch those cards if you want to fill out cards. If you took one, please make sure you can pass it. We'd love to get your question and hear your question, and our colleague Mel Freitag will help with that. So I want to get that process started. So like you have, and y'all can hold on to the mic as well.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it's your mic.
Sure. I feel that in order to help the campus to lean more into its Wisconsin idea and to build on its strengths, we have to look back at what has worked for us. One of the things that was when I think about what helped me to unify, I grew up in Madison. I didn't stay on campus. I tried to save my family money. I wasn't Greek. I was only a student athlete for like 3 or 4 weeks.
3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, because athletes had scholarships, and so I had to come train, lift weights, and then still go out to West Town and work at Sears. And so I couldn't do all of that and still stay a student. But the great unifying space on campus for a person who didn't go to the Buff, I wasn't at Greek parties, I didn't live on campus, was in the Afro-Am department. Because we were separated from black student athletes, where I met athletes and where they met older students like my mom was in humanities. And so we would come together because we didn't live in the same dorms. You'd have a 40-something-year-old person like my mom, but then you'd have football stars from the 80s like Larry, Emery or Fred Bobo. And we met there and we talked and we connected. In fact, I was sitting here making a list. There are 9 people from the Afro-Am department 40 years ago, 8 of whom I still keep in touch with, 7 of whom helped me start the nonprofits that I now run. And we met in humanities and the Afro-Am department. But when I look back, the program doesn't look as robust as it was when I was in it. It doesn't seem to have the same budget that it did when I was in it. And it was sitting in humanities that I heard about the role and the history of the Black church and the strength of the Black community, that part of what I'm doing today was actually formulated. I saw myself in a larger scheme of things. I was an average writer, always got C's in high school, but when Professor Nellie McKay pulled me into her class to ask me about my insights on my essay about Pudd'nhead Wilson, I realized she thinks I'm a good writer. Like she wants to know how I formulated. Like she said I was saying things that she'd never thought about, and where did I get that? I left out of there thinking for the first time, I'm smart. And I didn't even know who she was. I didn't know she was going to write or had written an anthology of Black history. But in that space, my work, my theology, my philosophy, my writing skills, and meaningful relationships were really forged. And I think while we're talking about finding places and discovering places and building places where students connect, we have to find places where students have connected and do connect. And so I just think we've got to find those kinds of spaces. And again, athletes, Madison born and raised Blacks, older folks, we convened in an Afro-Am department, and that was safe space for us. And so we got to find ways to build and bolster those departments and those places, because a lot of us got through the campus in the tumultuous 80s because of that department.
While you have the mic down there, thank you very much. While we have the dean, and so I would like to give you a chance. And I do. I'm messing up our technical people because they don't have a camera. But we have Dr. Lori Lopez from Director of Asian American Studies here as well. Lori, put your hand up. We might not catch you away. But so we have folks in here who are creating space on campus. Your point is important, and many of these faculty directors are trying to push. And as we move into the Levy building, I think that's going to be an important thing to think about.
Great, thank you. And so thank you for the panel, for your comments, Dr. G, for yours. I've heard a lot of really powerful comments here, thoughts, and in my mind, in my role, also suggestions and ideas. And Devon is probably shaking up there a little bit because he knows when we get together next week, it's going to be, all right, Devon, what do we need to do next? So that being said, on the issue of spaces, just to let folks know, we are in the process, and Christy's been in some of those conversations, of building a new building. And that is what will be known as Irving and Dorothy Levy Hall. It will house the Department of History, Center for Jewish Studies, African American Studies, Asian American Studies, Chicano Latina Studies, American Indian and Indigenous Studies, as well as Gender and Women's Studies and Religious Studies. And in the conversations around the design of that building and what goes into that building, in addition to the faculty offices that you need to accommodate academic departments, in addition to classroom space that will invite students into the building, and students will have to be in there because that building will host a lot of teaching. There's about 1,200 seats of classroom space in the building as well. Part of that design, and critical all the way through those conversations, is about space. It's about space where people can come together. And about space where students and faculty and staff can convene informally. And as much as you speak of your love of the humanities building, it is not a building that invites community and invites getting in. We want the built environment to help with what the people do. And that's what we're going to be trying to do in Levy. And each of those units has what we call something called a home space. And that is a space to think about what is it in their space that needs to speak to their communities in a unique way. So there's going to be power in that, right? And there's going to be power, I think, in what those look like and leaving that, understand that design and what happens to the units that have that. So we're making some strides in there and about the things that we are doing in that particular building. The other thing I want to say is, as I say, there's been lots of really, really great things said today, really powerful things. which, as a leader in the position that I am, giving me the ideas about where can we continue to affect change. And I think in the fearless sifting and winnowing, you're exactly right. We have to continually evolve and move forward and understand what are the things that we need to do, right? What are the barriers we need to bring down? What are the things we need to create? It's internal, we've got to do that internally, but it's also something that we are being asked to do by those that support this institution. And one of the events we had earlier this year, and I sort of was thinking about this, and with Brenda on the stage there, the National Science Foundation, which funds a lot of the research on this campus. I have been a beneficiary of NSF funding. I imagine Luke has been a beneficiary of NSF funding. The National Science Foundation, as well as underfunding agencies, are asking us in our research to engage, to co-create, to use a phrase I heard on the stage, with community. And so if we don't do that, we are not living up to who we are as an institution, right? We are not meeting what the world is asking of us. So I think this is a really important conversation to have. And it's not, again, just internally focused, but thinking about those that support us, those that have provided resources to this institution, are looking to us to be the ones that are co-creating in innovative and creative ways. Your center will be a key part of that, right? And so that's going to be something that as we move forward, we've got to be very, very mindful of.
Thank you.
If I can add to that, thank you. I think that creating in all of the different leaders here, from the faculty side to the staff, are creating that safe space to talk about this. I don't think that in the past we have been able to really say, wait a second, this is the first time that you have reached out to us in the community organizations or community leaders from the university, because we're always waiting or thinking that the university is going to say, yes, we're going to bring the resources. And actually that's part of my role, to make sure that I make the connections between some of those, not everything that I wish I could, but many. And how is that this is the first time, or some of the first times, that we are meeting between, I guess, campus leaders and community leaders, that now you're being kind of forced into that relationship, but we have been in community for a long time with the support of campus. So I think that there is a lot of things to do, but there's a lot of things that we have done to create that trusting relationship or trusting communication. And I think that is coming up more often. And I'm hoping that we're going to bring more of those leaders together. Certainly, again, the South Madison Partnership, all of the feedback that I also receive is, we have a trusted space where we can talk more about some of these issues.
Thank you. I want to bring in my colleague, Dr. Mel Freitag, who is our Assistant Dean and Director of DI Innovation and Training and Innovation. I think you have some questions from the audience.
Yes, we do. And so the first one is probably a question for all panelists, but anybody can take it. So currently UW-Madison is one of the few universities who's willing to toe the line in trying to support students of color. My organization, now of many, needs to adjust our ways of reaching out to students of color without using race. How can we creatively work around the issue of continuing to attract diverse students towards support services?
It sounds like it's going to end up in my lap here, at least at the beginning. I think it's has a lot to do with this discussion we're having today. Our ability to attract students to this university start long before they submit an application. And particularly in this area, you're not just recruiting a student a lot of times, you're recruiting a community and you're recruiting families. And so one of the ways I know we've been trying to work on it is developing intentional relationships with communities and community-based organizations who are supporting students along the way. And I think it's been a great way for students to see Madison as a really important option. And the irony of this is, we were probably doing this as much at this university back in the 60s. As part of the 5-year program, reaching out to communities all over the country, developing relationships and connecting with people. And I think that's important, telling our story so that students can see that this is a viable option. And also having our students tell our story. Right before this podcast, we had an amazing group of students talking about their research that they're doing here. And these students are doing incredible research. I mean, graduate school level research. That's the kind of experience you get here. And it demonstrates success. You can be successful here. But it also means when they get here, a lot of the things that we talked about here in terms of being ready. One of my mentors said, you know, you have to make sure you're ready. You have to make sure that you have a community of support. It's important to dig for the truth to make sure you're ready to support students when they get here. But it all starts with these really deep, meaningful relationships and having students see that this is a viable option. Those are things we've been doing for a long time. We just have to do them better. I see that we will be able to grow in this area. It's going to take a lot of learning, but we've been highly successful in recent years. I think we just have to build on that. So that's from someone who's kind of engaged in that space. I can do it, but others might have other perspectives.
I can just give you like a concrete example of something we do, are starting to do in the Department of African American Studies when we are recruiting graduate students. We are inundating our colleagues at HBCUs in the Midwest with information on our program. This is what we offer. These are our funding. These are our scholars. So you can go to places that have the students you are looking for. You can reach out to the Boys and Girls Club. You can reach out to nonprofits around the city that are engaging with students. Nonprofits like Freedom Inc.
Yes.
And Nehemiah, and remind them, hey, they need some help writing essays. Those are things that we can help students do, right? So you go to the places that have the critical mass of the folks that you're looking for.
Another question?
Yes.
All right. While listening to your stories, motivations, and ongoing work, it has been very inspiring. How do you continue to keep up your motivation and focus in times when progress might feel slow or stagnant? How do you deal with setbacks, like how the university responded to various incidents, and how do you keep up hope?
Can I answer
Go
that?
ahead. Sure.
I keep up hope with all of what I'm hearing today, and certainly from the panel, and just seeing every one of you on one side. I think that my role as a government relations is one heavy piece that is really important for me to continue to learn and to continue to move forward. But certainly the balance and how I keep motivation is the work that all of the partners that are connected to South Madison Partnership are doing. Every day I hear someone saying, I feel like I belong just by looking at the walls, just by looking at the arts. Certainly Leda G is one of the amazing artists, also Badger, that was able to put that tint to our space, where people are taking selfies, where young kids are like really laughing and elders are dancing. That is where I keep my motivation. I know that I have a very specific story that probably will be for another time, why I came to this country and how the university is the piece that has been difficult in that story. So for me, it's like a full circle to be able to be here, to be able to feel that I have my office right on South Park Street that is directly coming to the university, and that's my journey. I want many others to go through that journey in terms of like being able to reach the university in an easier way.
Personally, I feel charged to do it because of who my father was. Henry Clark was born in 1932 or 1931 in rural Mississippi and grew up sharecropping, and he could not imagine my life. In many ways, I've lived the quote-unquote American dream. My father had no formal education, could never read anything I ever wrote, but he was the smartest man I know. And he was the hardest working person that I know. And I keep a picture of him in my office when I'm tired, because it reminds me of the incredible privilege of my life. And I have been a beneficiary of a public education system that I came into at the right moment when a lot of resources were available. So a kid who could barely read, got one-on-one help 3 times a week from Miss Carter for 4 years, and became someone who got scholarships to college. And I benefited from professors who went well beyond their office hours to help me, to tell me what the GRE was and how I should study for it, because I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how to get to graduate school, and a beneficiary of an advisor in graduate school who explained to me this weird world of academia without ever making me feel small or little or dumb. And so I just want to do that for other people. I want to open the door, I want to widen the doorway, and my anger and frustration comes from seeing it narrow, from seeing it harder for people to do what I was able to do because I happened to be in the right places at the right time, to benefit from programs that took my family from being, working class to comfortably middle class or better. And not just in tangible things, but in the way that I am able to live my life. My parents moved here when I had my first daughter. My dad was in a nursing facility. He had a series of strokes and we couldn't care for him at home. And he was always so confused by the times I would come see him, because sometimes I would come on Monday morning and sometimes I would come on Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday. And he was like, well, your boss, you're supposed to be at work. He could not understand the autonomy of my life.
That's right.
That I could work when I wanted to, as long as it wasn't around classes, that if I wanted to spend my evening working on my book, then I could do it. And I'm reminded of that when I'm frustrated and when I'm tired, because my dad was a manual laborer and he broke his body for us every day. And I don't do that to make myself feel bad, because I know that I work hard, but it puts it into context for me.
Well, I think it's no question, but that some of the experiences that people have shared have been extremely important for the insights that can be offered. But I'm certain that there are insights from this audience as well. And one of the things I think we would want to emphasize is the importance of communication, of exchange. And so there is this issue of what you're also ready to do to, in fact, make it possible for enhancing the kinds of developments that we've been talking about. Because this was not to be just a chance for people to articulate our own experiences. It was to say, what do we know from these experiences that can be built on, and what other experiences are out there, and where is the willingness to engage in that reciprocity that Reverend Gija had talked about earlier. That's what this is all about. How do we foster the communication, the exchange, the willingness to be participants in ensuring that this notion of outreach to all, of engaging all, of ensuring that we have the talent that we know is all around. How do we see that all of those kinds of things are secured? So this is just to say, I know we're going to come back to points to your input, but it's really how do we try to ensure that this is a conversation that is more than the people here talking to you as an audience.
We get Dr. Reverend G to come in and be a visiting lecturer, which I'm working on.
See,
Oh, I like that idea.
Go ahead.
So I think you're part of the answer. Great question from the audience. And in the years that I've been the dean, one of the things that keeps me going, as it inspired me, is that this conversation, I think to your point, Cora, is not excellent. It just happens here. And part of the work that we've been doing with Devon this whole weekend is to reconnect with our alumni, to allow them to tell their stories, to let us know what their stories are. And one of the benefits of this weekend and the past events we had is that I've gotten to hear a lot of those stories from folks who have been here before and tried this path. And so this weekend we've got folks who graduated in the 60s to folks who graduated in May. And that arc is a powerful one. And when I get to go out on the road and meet with alumni, and obviously as the dean, when I'm on the road, I'm generally meeting with alumni who have been very successful in their lives. they are passionate about the work that we are doing and passionate about making sure this university lives up to its aspirations. And so that gives me that kind of hope to keep going, because I know that we've got support beyond campus from that vast alumni network to help us try to achieve our goals.
Is there another one? Are we good?
Sure. There's now another question about space, and I'm going to try to tag onto this. So how is the university addressing, supporting, investing, electing in a few spaces on campus for students of color? We talked about, physical space of, actual built environments, of, creating new buildings and things. And a lot of times we talk about how students, we talked about this morning, how students actually remember their experiences outside of the classroom and the community. So what are some examples of bridging that, of creating more third spaces between campus community, between classroom, outside of classroom? We have service learning experiences, we have volunteer opportunities, but what are some other opportunities that we can really bridge that gap?
That sounds like a great question for you.
Yeah, I just have a couple of examples of classes that actually schedule space at South Madison Partnership for a class. Social work is one of them, school of education. There are many classes that might not be a full partner, if you will, in terms of like Odyssey and the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center or Neighborhood Law Clinic. But they schedule space for their students to be able to host a class there and then have an internship at the school or at a space in community. I think that has been really successful in terms of being in community, really getting food for local vendors. We have a little bit an easier transaction when we are off campus to be able to bring those businesses into our home. But they're also feeling that they're part of community. So being able to interact with other partners that are community-based has been really important for those UW students to be able to say we are creating community, we are in community, we eat and breathe and see community artists and food. So I think that has been really powerful. Again, South Madison Partnership, one location. Certainly we also connect with many organizations in the community. Centro Hispano is one of them, the Hub Urban League, that we know that some of those classes maybe are hosted in some of those spaces. The same with Nehemiah.
I think it's fascinating to know that there are some possibilities for addressing these issues. Devon knows one of my big concerns as always is really around the question of how do we engage the larger community in understanding what the well-being of all will mean. Because if we try otherwise, what we see are these kinds of things with the reduction or elimination of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, because they're not thought of as relevant. So if we don't try in some way to make it clear that these are extremely relevant for the well-being, for the fortunes and future, not just of this state, but of this nation and the world, that these are the things, and that's why when I go back to the Wisconsin idea, which was never as inclusive as it needed to be, if we really are going to make it a fundamental idea, it has to be including why it is important, why it's imperative that we are addressing all of these kinds of concerns and not having to sneak around, as we sometimes have to do now, to find little bases of support for things that are really fundamental. So it's not that I've got any answers to them, because you have. I'm sure there are some suggestions that you've got, but to me, those become extremely imperative, important kinds of things to have to consider as we ask, what's the future look like that will be different from the past?
On that note, we're almost at time, but I want to end there because I think it speaks to where we have to go. One of the reasons why we tried to create this podcast is for these kinds of conversations to start, right? And then what's the actions beyond that? How can we, one of my colleagues talked about, create a mental model of what's possible, right? If you can't create a space where you can activate a possibility, get people to think beyond, I think in this room we generated that. Now it's about what does that mean to kind of move this forward in a really important way. And it's not going to be easy, because when you're seeking truth, there's going to be some pain in that. The journey is, part of the journey is going through that. There's not an easy pathway, and I think sometimes we avoid the pain in order to get to the other side where you have to do it. You have to start with these honest spaces where you can come up and say, hey, this was the intent for this place in the beginning. But I take a lot from young folks. I remember when First Wave remixed on Wisconsin. They said, we're just going to take it, we're going to do something different with it. We're going to create a different way of doing this. This may have been a way it been done, but we're going to do something different. Y'all hear more about that tonight when it comes to them. So we can accept that, or we can take it, deconstruct it, and take it in the way we want to take it. But it starts with having a place like this. And so that's why we started. We even had to push our boundaries and figure out how to do this live. So I want to thank you for doing that. Before I close, I do want to thank our folks here at Hamel who have just been incredible. Let's give them a round, because that's part of it. Right? This is an incredible building, and they saw, and that staff, when we came here for pre-production, was incredible. They got excited. They got more excited than I did. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm a little nervous. I got to thank our producer, I always tell the producer, Marlita Bevenu, who has been incredible for back in the back, doing the thing. My colleagues from Strategic Communication, who are just incredible in helping us put this all together. But I want to thank our panelists for being here and helping us to generate this conversation. I got to do this because Marlita will get me in trouble. If you want to catch our podcast, we're on all podcast platforms. And we've generated a really interesting podcast today that we're going to do in the future. So pay attention to it. It happened this morning, a great idea that's coming out. So we'll have some more podcasts dropping down here in the next few weeks. So please join in and follow the discussion. Having said that, I always end my show with, I'll see you on the other side. Take it easy. Good night.